What are the main questions that you'd like to have answered? And I guess who can answer those questions for you?
Well, I guess at the start of it, and the crux of the matter for a lot of alumni that have reached out, and we've had lots of correspondence with this week, is that it was a club team in 1975. It was the St George Budapest women's team. They were classified as that in all the media, or most of the media that we've seen, the newspaper articles. They weren't named as the Australian women's team travelling to Hong Kong. There wasn't a due process for selection, as in play for your club, get selected for your local rep team, get selected for the state, and then participate in the national titles, and then be selected by a nominated, appointed full national coach to select players from each and every state, or not every state, in the case at some point. So the question is it's not a full national team. It was from what I understand and have read and heard, it was a club team on a training pitch midweek one night saying, hey, we're going to put a team, we're going to go to Hong Kong, and it was basically a club team with a couple more players from another Sydney club, I believe, is Ingleburn. So there was no process or selection process, which is a big concern, and that's a question we'd like answered as to, moving forward from there. We had that process, and the best of the best were picked.
Mm. So have you been surprised by the reaction to this? And I suppose specifically, what most people would hear is what's in the media. And there seems to be this underlying issue that for a lot of the alumni, or many that we've heard from, is that it was a club team. They didn't go through the same rigorous processes as they each had to go through to be recognised as a Matilda. And therein lies a sticking point.
Well, I mean, let me answer the first part of the question. Yeah, I think I think we're surprised by the extent of the criticism received, especially given that this Matildas, the brand, women's football, the journey, the story of how it's evolved over time, the kind of obstacles that they've had to overcome, and different generations of footballers and administrators and coaches, they've each individually played a part in dismantling the bricks of walls maybe that have obstructed the growth of the game. And to all of a sudden see this brand which has been built on inclusivity, and all of a sudden have this kind of outlier, maybe a group or a sentiment which is very evidently exclusionary. I think that's the most disappointing part. And I think, with the benefit of hindsight, I think even a lot of the people who, we've known for a long time, who have been quite critical, I think with the benefit of hindsight, they'll look back and maybe be a bit regretful for some of the comments they've made. And I actually feel sorry for the 75ers, because at some point in time, they're going to be invited to functions and so forth as part of the wider alumni. How are they going to be made to feel? I mean, I just try to put myself in their shoes, not feeling really embraced by their peers. I think that's probably the saddest thing for us, is that. Now, on the second part of your question about, this team coming from one club, well, we know that's been debunked. The players came from 3 clubs. They were St George, who, they were undefeated for 11 years in a row, right? I think 10 or 11 years in a row. And, the predominantly the best players in women's football at the time came from that team. You had players from Ingleburn, and I think it was a team from Guildford as well. And the other thing is that all of the states were asked to nominate players, and because they were all focused at the time, I think it was for a state championships that they were playing in at the time, they didn't nominate anyone. So effectively, the team was made up of players from 3 clubs. But, you know, we also tested and tried to find out if there were throughout history teams that have come from 1 or 2 teams. And I mean, there's been so many. You know, there's a Scottish team in 1904 that was made up entirely of Celtic players, played in the Home Nations Championship. There was Soviet teams in the 50s and 60s made up of predominantly, almost entirely actually, of Dynamo Kiev players, because they were the dominant teams. You know, the Hungarian team in 1954 was made up of, you know, players from 3 or 4 teams. So that's not, you know, unsurprising, especially when we go back in history, that teams are made up of, you know, the more dominant teams that you know, so that wasn't necessarily something that would preclude you know, this team from being recognized as a national team.
Anta, could some of this fallout have been avoided if the alumni was included in some of the discussions around this, so that everybody was on the same journey at the same time, which often makes it easier than trying to navigate the thorny issues once it's declared?
Possibly. Look, Tracy, you know, given the sensitivities that are always related to these kind of process of recognition, especially when, you know, the decision was made a while back to actually provide, you know, with each cap a legacy number. You know, introducing or maybe recognizing a new team always attracts maybe that sensitivity or that risk of sensitivity, that numbering might be reordered or changed and so forth. So that it wasn't something that the board and FA was not aware of, and we were aware of always the areas or the maybe the considerations that people had about why this team shouldn't be recognized, which is why, you know, we wanted to be quite exhaustive on those 11 criteria, and also test them with people, like we said, that we sought the help of internationally, to really come up with something which was something we would be very comfortable in rationalizing, be able to justify a decision and be transparent with. So yes, maybe we could have got alumni involved, but this policy doesn't only relate to this particular team. This is a policy that the FA now can apply to any team in future that maybe, you know, we didn't previously recognize, and, you know, we come to discover may have played in a tournament and so forth. And for the first time, we have actually a process and a policy for a defined one.
So there might be a pre-Matildas prior to the 75 team.
Who knows? Who knows? What gives us comfort is now we have an exhaustive process defined, you know, that people can follow and apply to either, you know, recognize them or not.
Pat, I know that you're not naive to the fact, you know, that some people still have issues around the fact that it was seen as a club team that went to represent at an international tournament. So maybe if you take us back to that period and that time and give us a bit of insight into where women's football was then, how it came about that this team was invited, and just some of the detail around how all this evolved.
In the early 1970s, we were contacted by a lovely man called Charles Pereira, and he asked if the St. George team would be interested in playing in a club competition in Asia. They were trying to get this organized over there and sort of going around saying, could they get enough teams to join to make a viable competition? Of course, St. George team jumped at it, and we started fundraising straight away. And then we didn't hear anything for a while. In 1974, we organised our first Australian National Championships in Perth. New South Wales team won the tournament. A gentleman called Oscar Mate from WA was voted in as president. I became the secretary of the AWSA in 74. At that time, we did not choose a national coach or a national team. That was left over to be discussed at the AGM of the 1975, after the 1975 tournament, which would be held in August 1975. So that was the story at the time. 1974, everything, as far as we were concerned, was organised. And then in early 1975, I was contacted again by Charles Pereira, who was the General Secretary of the Asian Ladies Football Confederation. And he said things had changed. The competition was no longer a club competition. It had evolved into a national team competition. And would Australia be interested in putting forward a team? New South Wales had won the tournament in 1974. 9 of those girls were in the St. George team, but at that time, they were the best in Australia, as far as everyone was concerned. So I had a problem there because we hadn't chosen a national team at the time. I contacted our president, Oscar Mate, told him what was happening, and I said, would you please contact all the states, talk to their representatives and ask them to put forward their players to be considered for the Asian Cup team, because we have to get moving on this. He did that. Oscar came back to me and said, because our 1975 Australian National Championships was going to be held at exactly the same time in 1975 as the Asian Cup, all the states had decided that our national tournament had to take preference, so they would not be putting forward any players to go to Asia to play in the Asian Cup. So I then received an acknowledgement from the committee of the AWSA saying that if New South Wales wanted to organise the team, as long as they did it correctly, then we had the AWSA's permission to go ahead. We then contacted everyone we were supposed to contact. You know, we contacted the ASF, as we were members of Oceania at the time, as were New Zealand, and New Zealand were being offered a chance to play in Asia as well. The Australian Soccer Federation, after hearing everything, gave us their approval to play in Asia as an Australian 11 to represent Australia, and we were allowed to wear the full Australian kit, the same exactly as the 1974 men's team. Because we had 9 of the New South Wales team that had won the national championships in 1974, and they were available to go to Asia, the team was then made up from players from Ingleburn and from Guildford Wanderers.
So when you went to compete, were you fully competing as Australia? Is that your understanding of what you did at that time against other national teams?
Yes, that is why we went through the ASF. We went to them, told them the story and said, would this be possible? Would you agree to us going there to play for Australia? We've done everything we possibly can to get a team together. They were quite happy.
Dr. Karen Menzies, welcome. It's been a biggish week, I would say, for lots of people for lots of different reasons. But could you give us a bit of an indication as to how this week has unfolded for you with the news of the new Matildas?
Yeah. So I was first alerted about the Football Australia decision by former Matildas alumni, Renee Iserev, who was kind of checking in on me. I don't do social media, so I wasn't aware of what had happened. And basically what Renee was wanting to check in about is that my position as the first Indigenous Matilda has now changed, and I'm down the order to second, which is fine. I don't have an issue with it. It's just the process that I'm concerned about, that they haven't acted in a transparent and ethical way, and especially as far as my role on the National Indigenous Advisory Group. So I was appointed to that position in September 2021. Yeah, I was appointed in September 2021. So nearly 3 years. I stepped down last month, but for the last year, I've actually been the co-chair. And so this decision that was made by the board, I've met a number of the board members. I've been to meetings in person and online. So I just felt that there was complete disregard for my feelings. Whatever decision they made, it just was a demonstration of colossal disrespect, I think. And I've contacted the Secretariat of the National Indigenous Advisory Group that is part of Football Australia, as I said, the group that I've been a part of for the last 3 years until last month. And they hadn't been informed either. And so, it doesn't actually give them an opportunity to make a comment to Anita Rita's family. It doesn't give them a comment to consider whether this has been a process that they think has been delivered and dissected in an appropriate way. So I just think the lack of communication is alarming in the way that this decision has been made. And the change in the criteria that's been used as well, from what has previously been used to assess whether or not the 75ers, which are absolutely trailblazers, there's no question about that. They're pioneers of the game. But yeah, I just think that we needed to all be involved, all have a voice, all be acutely aware of what the new criteria was and who established the new criteria. Like, where did that come from and how did that supersede the previous decision of the board for the last 2 occasions when this issue has been discussed and determined that no, the 75ers are not to be considered Matildas. So yeah, just lots of questions I've got.
If Football Australia called everyone together now, like post the announcement, do you think that might help for everybody to sort of understand what has happened here and what's gone on? Would there be a benefit in doing something like that, bringing everyone into a room together to have this discussion and to be able to ask those questions and have the officials answer as to why and how and the structure and the process, etc.?
I think there would be a huge benefit in bringing all the key stakeholders together and hearing from each person, and also hearing from Football Australia about who the international representatives were who were originally documented in the articles, but have since become a bit invisible. I'm not entirely sure why that's the case, but I think it would be really, really helpful to have the chance for all of us to sit down and have an open, respectful discussion about this issue. That would be fantastic. And I know I would certainly participate.
So, Pat, when you look at it now and the situation that we find ourselves in now, you are the First Matildas, or the originals, as they like to refer to you as. What do you think about relationships now and some of the healing relationships maybe that are required because now you're part of the alumni? And, there's been no surprise that the alumni still have questions about it all. Has there been much discussion between you and the Matildas alumni? Do you think that is something that will happen in the future?
I can't say, as far as I'm concerned, we're all Matildas. We're all in what you would call as the same club, if you know what I mean. Everyone, no matter who they are, has their own opinion about whatever. They're entitled to that opinion, and I respect that. And if later on things can be healed, the rift can be healed if there is one, then that's fine. I have no problem with anyone at all.
And so I wonder what you think about is the next, I don't know if you call it a healing process or what, but what do you think happens now?
Well, I guess we'd like to as a collective group where there's a big group of alumni and respectfully, we would like some questions answered. We will put forward a letter to the board at Football Australia with some questions, and we celebrate our Matildas, each and every one of us, and millions of Australians do as well. And this is upsetting that this is causing a kind of a divide and a fracture and kind of taking away from our biggest tournament coming up in a couple of weeks at the Olympic Games. Yeah, we're just hoping to have a voice and to be heard as alumni, to be included and considered. We weren't really considered when these decisions were being made, and the 75ers were, and that's okay. They were considered. They had a voice. They had people fighting for them. They had, people within the federation accept and acknowledge it and bring them in. But alumni that have been the future, the history of our game since the 70s, we just didn't feel included. We should have, I feel, and many alumni do feel, perhaps we should have been brought in on these conversations.
Would you consider ever sitting with a group of alumni or having a Zoom meeting with as many alumni that want to join as possible, maybe including the 75ers, to sort of sit and just work through that process and answer any questions that they had?
Yes, and I think we're going to have to, Tracy, because that whole Matildas brand and the alumni, I mean, they share so much in common. And for us at FA, I mean, we're the institution, right? And as officials, we're custodians of that organisation and everything around it. But long after each of us are gone, that kind of alumni that has to, that has to remain intact and solid and positive. And it's necessary, I think, that at the appropriate time we need to get people in the room.